I beg your pardon. Shall I start again, Liz? I think I'd better. Please can I welcome everyone to this meeting of the Audit and Governance Committee on Wednesday, the 11th of October, from the Walton Suite. Somebody else has a microphone on, I think. No? The time is 6:30 p.m. My name is Councillor Margot Power, Chairperson of the committee. This meeting is live streamed from the Council's YouTube channel, and the recording will also be available after the meeting. Subtitles can be switched on, and advice on how to turn these on is set out on our website. Can I remind members, especially the chairman, to use their microphones, and can everyone ensure mobile phones are on silent? In the unlikely event that it is necessary to evacuate the building, the fire alarm will sound. Please follow all the instructions given to you by our team. Turning to the agenda. First of all, we have apologies. I believe we have none.
Correct, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Any disclosures of interest? Thank you very much. None. I do have one chairman's announcement. The target date for publication of our audit accounts for the financial year ending 31st of March 23 was the 30th of September 23, as set out within the Accounts and Audit Regulations 2022. The audit of these statements has not yet commenced, and so EY Ernst Young have not been able to provide either their opinion nor their auditor's annual report, also required to be issued by the 30th of September, as set out in the Code of Practice for Local Government Bodies. Ernst Young have instead provided an audit letter setting out the reasons for the delay. As a result of the delay, statute requires the Council to publish the unaudited accounts, along with an explanation of why the audit has not been completed by the target date. To satisfy this requirement, both the unaudited annual financial report 22-23 and Ernst Young's explanatory letter were published on the Council's website by the 30th of September. I had an update yesterday that the PSAA have confirmed that out of the 467 audited opinions that were due, only 5 have been completed and given by the 30th of September. There are also 456 outstanding from previous years, which is not ideal. Thank you. Moving on to the...
Thank you. I was wondering if during your announcements you were going to explain why this meeting was moved back. I think it would be useful if it is going to be a change of dates or additional meetings, if there was some consultation about the dates to suit members of the committee's availability.
Thank you, Councillor Godfrey. I very much regret to need the change to move the date. We were expecting, as you know, to have the Constitution at the meeting at the original date. That proved impossible. It was likely that it would be available for this date. And as you know, we do want to get the Constitution done. However, when we look at the Audit and Governance Work Programme in just a minute, Mrs. Evans will be updating us as to why there has been this delay, and indeed why it was being delayed to the November meeting now. So if we would like to move to that, Mrs. Evans, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. You're absolutely right. This meeting was pushed back for a couple of weeks, and we were hoping to have the Constitution here for us to debate and for us to review. The reason that was delayed was because of the in-depth work that the Constitution Working Party has actually put into this review. We only finished that work on Monday, the previous Monday, and now my work is going into that report, making those final changes in readiness for our next scheduled meeting, which will be the 9th of November. With a view to getting it to full council. We have had COVID in the middle of that, or I have had COVID in the middle of that, but it didn't stop us meeting because we met online. But we have done a complete page turn. We have gone through 400 pages in depth We've had some really good discussions, really good debates, and there are some suggested amendments and changes. It does take time, and I know that this committee has been a long time in waiting for this review. It was on the cards before I came, and it was mentioned to me at interview. So one of the things that I'm really keen to do is bring that review to you, which will be here by hook or by crook at our very next meeting. So thank you, Chair.
Councillor Godfrey, would you like me to mention the consultation on the change of date? Would you like me to answer that question? Thank you. We weren't expecting to have to change the date, and it's always a disturbance to all members when we do have to do that, and indeed to staff. We do have deputies for attending meetings because of this very reason, that life happens and we do have to change dates. Very rarely, I'm glad to say, but the primary persons to be there are officers and the chairman. If we did put forward a change of date and it was obvious that we would not be able to provide quoracy, then we would of course look again. I think that's a normal procedure, is it not?
Yes, that's right, Chair.
And you had another question, Councillor Godfrey.
If we moved on to the next item,
We are indeed on the work programme.
Yes.
Thank you.
Looking forward to, as I am for all meetings, to the 9th of November. We have two major items on there. Not to belittle Mr. O'Reilly's item on the pay policy statement, but the audit report and the constitution review. Firstly, the update you gave in your announcement, are we sure the audit report is going to be available? Secondly, for the constitution to be available for the 9th of November, we must have the report from the monitoring officer by next Wednesday. Will that be the case?
Mrs. Evans?
Councillor Godfrey, when you say we, do you mean the Constitution Working Party? Yes, that's actually due to come to you either Friday or Monday at the very latest, but I believe we've got something penciled in to go through and discuss that. Thank you.
And regarding the audit results, I think it's very unlikely that we will have that at the 9th of November. I think today will be a much lighter meeting than we would normally expect. However, we should brace ourselves for November. Thank you. Are we happy to note the work programme, members? Councillor Cutler.
Apologies, Chair. I meant to raise this with you before the meeting started, but just the reminder of member training on understanding the accounts next Thursday, which is an in-person meeting. Placeholder has been issued to all members, but I think it's quite important that members of the Audit and Governance Committee turn up for this one and deputies, and also encourage as many other members as possible to come along, since so many of them have an aversion to looking at accounts.
Mrs. Keyes, do you know how many people you have attending?
No, I don't have details of that, Chair, but I would just add that it's an externally provided course. We've got an expert coming from SIPFA, and that person not only has experience of auditing sets of accounts, but also producing sets of accounts within local authorities and working with audit committees to understand them. So I would encourage you to come.
Perhaps you could find out who's decided to attend, and perhaps group managers could be persuaded to chase things up a bit on that. I get quite impatient when members leave financial matters to audit committee. think that's a little inadequate. Thank you. And Councillor Miller.
I'm going to have to give my apologies for next Thursday. I'm away on holiday, I'm afraid.
Hopefully your deputies will be able to attend.
I hope it will, because I can't make it next Thursday.
We will look at the list of who can attend and decide what we need to do. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mrs. Keys. So we're happy to note the work programme. The minutes, item 5, the minutes on pages 7 to 12. May we agree these as a correct record? Agreed. Thank you very much. We have no public participation. So I shall move on to item 7, the Treasury Management Report. Mr. Bowflower and Mr. O'Rourke, I think you'd like to come up to the table. Mr. Bowflower first, thank you.
Good evening, members. Nice to see you all. I'm going to say a few opening words and I'll hand over to Dan to run you through the main headlines of the report. When we present this report, the most important thing we come here to say to you is that we've complied with the Treasury Management Strategy. That remains the case, but with one notable exception, which I'll explain first and foremost, and that's set out in section 20 of the report. We had one breach of the strategy over the summer on one day, where too much money was invested in an individual money market fund, breaching the limit that was in part of your strategy. That was a mistake made by somebody in the team in misallocating in the records that we keep the amount that was in that particular fund, so the controls that we have in place didn't pick that up. The more positive news is that that was picked up the next day and corrected. So this was only an overnight exposure in what is actually a very secure form of deposit. But nonetheless, we do take this seriously and hence clearly reported this to Liz as soon as we spotted it and are here to tell you tonight. We've reflected on this on the team. We haven't changed any of the controls in the team, but have re-emphasised the importance of the accuracy in the way that the team works to try and make sure that the chances of this happening again are as small as possible. I'm happy to take questions on that individually if there are any now, or hand over to Dan and he'll take you through the rest of the report and we can pick up questions at the end.
I think we would like to put questions on that subject. I will kick off, and usually in this case, I think this has happened once before in my time as a councillor. So there's obviously a question about the controls, but the real question is who would be liable had there been a loss?
So for a loss that, in the instance that a loss occurs when the strategy is breached, we would pick that up as a supplier. If it's a loss when the investments are within the strategy, that's a different matter.
Thank you very much. Do we have any other questions on the breach, members? Perhaps we'll move on to Mr. O'Rourke then. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, members. So this report will cover the Treasury management activity in the first quarter of 2023-24. This is actually a new requirement set out by SIPFA and their Treasury Management Code that from April of this year, Treasury management indicators got to be reported on a quarterly basis. So the format of this report and a lot of the content will look very familiar, but this report does cover off that quarterly requirement. I will just reiterate what Andrew said. So apart from the breach that we've talked about, the rest of the Treasury management activity within the first quarter of the year did comply with the Treasury management and the investment strategy and all of the relevant statutes and guidance and accounting standards that we follow. Moving to the economic commentary, there's quite a lot to take in there, but just I think it's worth dwelling on that momentarily, just to consider the economic environment that we were operating in the first 3 months of the year, very similar to the previous year. Think of the persistently high inflation and rising interest rates, and that's obviously the environment that we're operating in at the moment. Ultimately, from an investment perspective, that does present us with opportunities to seek some slightly higher returns on the investments that we seek to invest. after a period where we've seen next to none. So we've sought to do that where possible. Table 1 in the report, which is on page 18 of the pack, shows a summary of the net borrowing position at the 30th of June, which shows a slight decrease in the net borrowing of 5.2 million. This does reflect the normal pattern of activity, where cash balances do tend to be higher in the early part of the financial year, and then drop off towards the end of the financial year. Moving to the borrowing update and strategy on page 19. There was no new borrowing taken on, and there's not actually been any change to the level of existing borrowing in the first 3 months to any the new borrowing that is required. In the future, we'll work with Liz and her colleagues and our Treasury Management advisors, Arlene Close, to seek the most opportune moment to borrow. The investments update, as I mentioned, investments have increased by 5.2 million, and that extra cash has primarily been invested into money market funds. You'll see the investment benchmarking on page 21. There is a slight increase in bail-in risk, but that can be attributed to the higher money market fund balances. But it's quite important to stress that these are diversified products, and our Treasury Management advisors, Arlene Close, do consider them bail-in light. You'll see that the rate of return has increased comparative to March, and also in comparison to other local authorities, which is hopefully demonstrating that we at Hampshire County Council and our team are doing our job effectively. But again, it does sort of reflect that wider market and economic condition that I talked about a moment ago with those higher interest rates. Moving to the pooled funds, property generally has seen a downturn, and this has been reflected in the capital value of the pooled property fund that we're invested with currently. However, that fund has offered good total returns for the duration of the period that we've been invested in it. And actually, it's both our view and that of Arlene Close is that we are better holding on to that position rather than getting out now, as it were, and realising a capital loss on that when we are seeing consistent income returns from that investment. In terms of the compliance report, as I said, all of the indicators and the compliance limits that we seek to measure were complied with in the first quarter of the year. One indicator that I will just draw your attention to is the liability benchmark, which we're now required to report on a quarterly basis. As I've mentioned just a minute ago, there is a need to borrow that is identified in this, and that's what this liability benchmark graph seeks to show. Basically, that there is a gap between the existing borrowing that the council holds and the resources that it has to meet the forecast CFR, and that the council will need to take on more external borrowing at some point in the future to meet that need. But again, we will work with Liz and her colleagues and consult with Arlene Close on the most opportune time to go to market and arrange that borrowing. So that was everything, Chairman. Thank you. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Raw. Members, do we have questions? Councillor Chamberlain.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, my question is on the liability benchmark. It is perhaps aimed in the direction of Ms. Keyes. So if I understood the report correctly, it represents a just over 70% increase in loans required over the next 3 years, resulting by the end of 2026 in about a 55% increase in the borrowing commitment, which at face value obviously are very large numbers. So I guess I have two parts to the question. One, what's driving that capital borrowing need over the next 3 years and the significant increase that's sat behind it? And two, as you've acknowledged, the kind of the economic uncertainty or the environment, I think, as you termed it, that we currently find ourselves in. From a council's perspective, how do we reflect that uncertainty in our forecasts looking forward?
Mrs. Keyes.
Thank you, Chair. So yeah, to answer the first question, what's driving that marked increase in the need to borrow? That is the HOA new homes building programme. So it's not a requirement within the general fund. It's solely to do with that new build programme and the capital investment there. And then how do we reflect the economic conditions in our forecast going forward? Every time we assess a capital investment opportunity, so a project comes forward, we look at the current economic conditions and use those when we're assessing the viability of that project. And then as we look at the viability of those projects, only those which are viable with current rates and current costs go ahead to the next stage. So that's how we reflect those changing conditions, and then we would reassess that viability as conditions change.
Thank you, Mrs. Keys. Any other questions, members? Councillor Godfrey.
Two matters, Madam Chairman. One relates to pool property fund. At the year end, we need to publish the difference in market value and investment value. What is the current difference, and at what point do we need to reflect the differences between market and invested funds in our accounts? And secondly, what is the current expectations on long-term interest rates? When are they likely to come down, or are they not?
Mr. Beauflower, thank you.
I'll start, if I may, and maybe go in reverse order. So the interest rate forecasts we get from advisors Island Close are that interest rates are now at their peak. They don't forecast another rise. They expect them to stay around where they are for probably at least another 12 months, and then to gradually start falling. I've seen a forecast, I think, that seems to come down to 3% in 3 years' time. So that's the sort of pattern that they're forecasting. With regard to investments in pool property, we are in the last year, I believe, of what was referred to as the statutory override, which is the accounting mechanism that means we aren't reflecting the unrealised change in market value of pooled investments in the general fund. So, and there's a consultation out at the moment from FLASAG about including that issue, and that may result in a further extension of that, or possibly a permanent removal of that feature. We just don't know. And then finally, there was a question about the current values at the moment, which I think we might have to come back to you on if we don't have it in the report, if that's okay.
Thank you very much. Does that reassurance from Island Close predate the events of last weekend?
It does.
Do you think that view may be changing? Or would you rather not say at this point?
I can honestly say I don't know. It may do, and obviously we will, we'll share through the regular conversations we have if it does. So we'll be talking further on that.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Keys, are you happy?
Yeah, and just on that final point, I mean, we keep a daily view on what the rates are doing, and we attend economic webinars from various different sources, as well as having our Treasury advisors through our colleagues at the County Council. So just to reassure the committee that we're keeping a constant eye on what those rates are doing.
Thank you, Mrs. Keys. Any other questions? Thank you very much. Now let's look at the recommendation, which is on to note the Treasury Management report and to note the non-compliance breach. Are we happy to accept those recommendations? Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Moving on to the external audit plan. Mr. Stutterford, would you like to come up to the table? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So yes, we normally would have delivered our audit plan to you for 22-23 several months ago, but unfortunately we have not been in a position to do so as yet. So we just wanted to give you a verbal update as to where we are currently at. As you rightly mentioned earlier, Public Finance reported today that 22/20 to you the 22/23 audit plan. This is not an individual issue for ourselves or specific to you. It's a system-wide issue that requires significant change of some kind, and a number of linked changes. So to reset the system and create a sustainable future for the preparation and audit of local authority accounts. So while I must stress at this stage no decisions have been taken, the Minister, Lee Rowley, attended the Select Committee hearings and wrote out all SY 151 officers in July. The key aspect for that was advocating a system reset, with one of the main aspects being through the application of backstop dates for audits, whereby if the audit has not been completed, the auditor would move on and report regardless and close the audit. The letter talked about work to be done over the summer to establish the details behind that, including those backstop dates. The overall principles of the development of options include those set out by the Minister and focus on two specific areas, those being maximising assurance and focusing on the most recent financial year. Specifically, he stated to provide as much assurance as possible for outstanding years, reporting as normal any significant concerns on an organisation's financial controls, financial reporting, as well as financial resilience, governance and risk, together with ensuring the capacity of the sector is focused on the most recent position as soon as possible. So as you can imagine, it is challenging to do both with only a certain amount of capacity available within a relatively short timescale. It's led to a lack of clarity in the interpretation, and that's not ideal when the aim is to reset the whole system to achieve the outcome of getting back on track. It's been raised previously in press articles or discussion around the sector that this may come with some downsides, including a number of qualified audit reports across the sector. This looks a possibility because demand in the sector outstrips supply. But again, no decisions are yet made, and while it has been raised as a possibility, that does not mean we can specifically say to any organisation precisely how this will impact your individual audit. There are lots of scenarios that may play out and lots of options currently, and we've undertaken modelling internally based on our interpretations of those scenarios. But at this stage, it is all modelling and planning for potential directions of travel. You would expect us to undertake these planning models so that when the guidance is forthcoming and decisions have been made, we can move towards getting things in place on a timely basis. One of the key factors is that if the reset applies to 22/23 and previous audit years, what will be the deadline for 23/24? We have to know and plan to achieve that, so we don't immediately just start having a backlog building up again. So to give you an illustration of that, let's assume they set a backstop for 22/23 audit at the 31st of March 2024. So then the 23/24 deadline would be September 2024. So that would give 6 months to do both lots of audits, which isn't achievable when you take into account our commitments to the NHS, the NAO and higher education sectors. So we need to get going on 23/24 earlier, meaning less time to actually do much of the 22/23 audits. So at the moment, the crucial thing is we need to wait for that guidance. We think one of the worst things we can do would be to start a number of 22/23 audits and then find out we cannot achieve their completion. That would put time on those audits that would need to be paid for and take time from local authorities to support the audit as far as we could get. So neither of which would be beneficial if we cannot finish the audits. So what we are doing is we are undertaking the work currently that the Minister and the FRC have been clear that we need to complete. And this includes the 22/23 pension fund audits and VFM work across local authorities, including Winchester. I mentioned earlier that the backstop dates are one thing. There's also accompanying actions by other stakeholders such as the NAO and SIPFA, and that may result in a reduced scope, which might help facilitate the completion of audits and sustainability. These are likely, though, to be short-term actions, while SIPFA has been asked to undertake a thorough review of the overall code of practice for local authority accounting. We're communicating regularly with key stakeholders, including officials at DLUC and with the FRC shadow system leader, Neil Harris. Our understanding is that we have reasonably interpreted the intent of the Minister's letter, which is to create that sustainable future and move forwards towards auditing current financial information as soon as possible. So we now just need to see the expected guidance, essentially, which will enable us to assess those backstop dates and finalise a plan for how we can undertake the 22-23 and 23-24 audits. This guidance is expected imminently, but has not yet been sent through to us. So as I said at the start, no decisions as yet have been taken. And when we have that guidance, we can take those decisions forward and communicate the decisions to all stakeholders, including yourselves. So I'm happy to take any questions that you may have on the issue.
Thank you, Mr. Studford. Members, who would like to start? Councillor Godfrey, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. This committee was vexed over the last 2 years by the request from our external auditors for additional funding against a contract based on their need to do extra work. Now that there's a risk that we are not going to have the audit completed even to the most basic level, I assume that the auditors will not require us to pay the bill in full.
Would you like to take that one, Mr. Studford?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, essentially, we are not wanting to do work which will not be finished, because then, as I mentioned, we would charge you for that work, essentially. So the less we do, the less we charge you. But as I note, for the 23-24 audits, that is under the new PSAA arrangement. So the fees will increase based on what the PSAA have agreed. Again, we don't actually know what that fee is yet. We just know as an indication it is increasing.
Thank you very much. Any other questions, members? I have a slight concern. I understood you to say that where the outstanding years, those 456 that have not been completed from before 22-23, they will just be glossed over. Is that correct? And if so, how can you audit a set of accounts when the opening position has not been audited?
That is one of the issues we've raised as to what that would mean in terms of opening balances. So one of the potential options would be that it is provided to us in a dictat that says you essentially accept those opening balances to be correct and you audit them from that period forward. So it's one of those difficult issues, and hence I think one of the reasons why it's taking some time to get to a final agreement on what we're being told to do going forwards.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Keys, we had a budget originally for the 22-23 audit. Could you let us know how far we are adrift from that budget, so far as we know at the moment?
Yeah, so the fee for the 22-23 audit, we don't know that. We know what we know what the scale fee, so the core part of the audit will be, and that is £52,500, plus PSAA have agreed to vary the scale fee by an additional £10,500 because of additional work the auditors are required to do over and above that which was in scope when the scale fee was set. So that scale fee is just over £62,500. But we obviously, as the work hasn't commenced yet, we don't know what the final fee will be. We did touch briefly on what the 23-24 fees might be. As Mr. Sutherland said, that's under the new PSAA arrangement, and we have been consulted on the scale fee going forward. which is proposed to be a 151% increase on the previous fee, so coming in at just under £158,000.
Thank you, Mrs. Keys. Mr. Stutterford, I know there are many parties involved in these discussions, and I can see light at the end of the tunnel for some of them, like a reduction in the level of assurance in some ways. Are you content that there is a full understanding of the implications for the council taxpayer, really, being taken into account when they are looking at changing the framework?
Yes, I think they're taking into account all stakeholders, including council taxpayers. It's obviously really important to get assurance, but I think obviously with these backlog ongoing, by auditing things from many years ago, it's becoming less relevant for the taxpayer, regardless of what assurance we can give at that point in time. So I think the recognition is now to get forward to the current position, and that's the most important point for the taxpayer. So yes, I think it is a very complex issue, and it's got a lot of stakeholders involved, hence it's taking a while. But like you, we do see light at the end of the tunnel at this point, so we're expecting the guidance imminently.
Thank you. And you referred to the guidance being imminent. Could you give us an idea of how long after that guidance becoming published we could expect to see an audit plan?
That's more of a difficult one to give you at the moment, because I honestly don't know when the backstop will be, and it's all about once we get the guidance with the backstop, we can then know where we need to be putting you in the scheduling essentially. So I wouldn't want to put a month on the audit plan at this stage, but once we know that the backstop, we can give you that information a lot more clearly.
Thank you very much. If we have no other questions, members, thank you very much, Mr. Studford, and good luck. Thank you. We move on to item 9 on the agenda, the update on employer attitude survey. Mr. O'Reilly, would you like to introduce this paper?
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to present the report to you and just take you through the few key points in it. Just start by saying that this is a good news story in the sense that we did the first survey last year and we were pleased with the overall results. And this year, the overall results are even better. So it's important to sort of note that before we start, that this is really a cause of celebration for us. So the employee attitude survey ran from 12th of June to the 7th of July. 294 employees took part in it. This year we added some, that's about 65% of the employees, which is considered good by industry standards. We added some demographic categories this year. 2 which are sufficient numbers to be statistically significant were sex and age. And we said here that HR will analyse the demographic data to see if there are any issues concerning equality, diversity and inclusion to be addressed. And I'm pleased to say that there's not, in the sense that for the 4 key questions, which acts as a kind of rudder for the rest of the survey, which are what I call the employee engagement questions. There's the first 4 on the list. Do I enjoy working for the council? Proud to work for the council, would recommend it as somewhere to work and still be here in 12 months' time. They're the 4 questions I'm referring to. The responses for our female employees are consistently higher than for our male employees. When it comes to age, differences are spread between all 4 questions. So there's no particular age group that could say that they're being disadvantaged anyway. So that's good news. I think the service, when you actually come to analyse it, is obviously, which we already thought of in the beginning, is very similar to age, because as you'd expect. Having said that, there are some interesting things in there in the sense that it seems that the people in their first year of service are universally happiest for our employees. So as they join, they're more proud to enjoy the work, more proud to work for the council, recommend it somewhere to work, which is good news. And that's maybe say something about the induction process and so on. So we've also, as you know, looked at the different services, although because with the survey, you have to gather together enough employees into a group to make it significant. We had to put together some fairly small services into groups which don't really naturally, you as members, you would see as a service. For example, HR is lumped with policy and comms. We're not actually one team, but we've been lumped together to make a team. But others are more recognisable teams. So that's the thing that ELB is working through with strategic directors, charters and service leads to say, are there any sort of questions that come up where we want to look at that in a bit more detail? That's an ongoing piece of work. There are no universal services. You say, well, every question, this service is on the naughty step of where we'd like to put it, but actually it changes according to question. Similarly, in terms of good results, if you like, you can see something like, I would still be working at the council in 12 months' time. The average for the council is 71%, but in public protection is 92%. So that's an interesting result. But in housing and property services, it's only 60%. I'd be interested to know why that is. Now, clearly, it isn't because they're unhappy about their, for example, the equipment they've got or the colleagues they work with or whatever, because they're coming out highest for those things. So it's quite a nuanced position that we need to pick to look at. What will probably happen is service leads and charters will have team meetings and say, these are some interesting results here. What do employees think that might mean? But be careful not to probe too much to try to make sure we maintain the confidentiality and anonymous nature of the survey itself. But I think that's probably the most interesting area in terms of further work that will be ongoing. Going back to the actual report itself, I think that overall the results are very positive. But one thing that we're particularly happy about is that my manager cares about me as a person, and my line manager gives me regular feedback on my performance. We've lumped together what's called the positive response, which is people who strongly agree and agree. But for these ones, quite remarkably, the actual strongly agree is higher than the agree. So you look on the actual survey itself, which is Appendix 1, questions 8 and 9, you see that the majority strongly agree that my line manager cares about me as a person, and strongly agree that my colleagues, my team are supportive and friendly. In fact, 4 teams, 100% of people who responded said they strongly agreed with that. So we've got a very happy workforce, both in terms of how they got on with their colleagues and how they got on with the line manager. Another thing I would sort of point out to members is that it's quite hard, and it's something that's quite gratifying for members, if it's quite hard to get across sometimes, is what the key objectives of the service is, and especially what the top priorities for the council are. And I say this from work in many councils. In both of these, we do particularly well in terms of the results shown at statements 12 and 13, which shows that the comms around those issues are good and strong. And that's something which we should be particularly pleased about, because not only do we have a workforce that's happy, but actually know why they're here and what the council's trying to achieve. And we've just finished up with some action points. Now, if you've got a very positive result, even more positive than last year, you're not going to have a massive list of remedial actions to come up with. We do need to make sure that, especially that the basic HR things of one-to-ones, appraisals, and team meetings, and so on, are held. I said about the demographic data and inequalities which we've dealt with. We've spoken to IT services about some comments by 8 employees, which seemed to me, as a non-technical person, to be quite interesting. I thought, well, these people are saying you could get a better server, you could get a better system, you could do this more, and obviously they know a lot about IT, so I pass those on to Stuart. And with our comms, we meet with Unison in a couple of weeks' time, and I think we've made a 10% increase in that results this last year, and I want to try and keep pressing in that direction about communication, about changes at work. And I think we're probably in a better position than ever on that, because the comms around the big change at work, which is TC25, has been, very, very strong, and with even a drop in sessions today for employees and so on. So I think I would expect that to go in the same direction. I mentioned in the report that I'm hoping that the positive results that people are saying are going to be here in 12 years' time and so on, coupled with the changes to the grading structure that were implemented 1st of April, will move our turnover in the right direction and get it down from 16.7% to closer to 12%. So I will, the next workforce results that will come to you next summer will hopefully show that we've moved in the right direction there. It moved slightly up last time. I'm hoping it'll move down next time. And so we're putting levers on that, particularly in terms of people who have just been here for a year are very happy. That's one lever. Increase in pay makes it more competitive. That's another one. So hopefully we'll see some positive movement in that direction. I'm very much hoping that's the case. So I'm happy to take any questions from members on the survey.
Thank you, Mr. O'Reilly. Questions, please, members. Councillor Goldsmith.
Well, I think this makes quite happy reading, doesn't it? I'm curious though, for example, the percentages going up for 84%, up from 79% for I enjoy working at the council, which is very good. I'm just wondering what deductions can one make from that about why people feel that more this year than last year, because that's really the information you need to learn to modify behavior or management. And obviously, if it's going the other way, that's probably more dire and you have to pay more attention. But I'm curious about the sort of, what lessons you can learn from it and what one can do even better.
Well, from an HR theory point of view, the purpose of doing employee attitude surveys is a bit like the thermostat on a machine. It's like saying, let's look at kind of what employees are thinking and feeling, and if they're generally happy about questions like that and they're moving in the right direction, then there's probably not a lot you need to do. I mean, in my previous authority, we asked the question, do you feel more valued by the council this year than you did last year? And we got only about 10% of people said they did, and that caused a great consolation among members. We spent a lot of time having focus groups and so on, and probably weeks and weeks really of focus groups with employees to try to get to the bottom of this. I remember one employee said, well, you asked the question in a strange way. Do you feel more valued this year than last year? She says, I don't feel more valued by my husband than I did last year. If you said, do you feel as valued? You've probably got a different question, different answer, which is one of the dangers of doing your own employee surveys. You've got to be really careful about how you ask the questions, which is why we tended to use ones here that are standards, industry standards. But they are really about saying something comes up, equalities, health and safety, whatever, you think, this is really bad. The vast majority of employees are unhappy. We need to do something about that. And that's when you bring in, and quite often the authorities will end up spending quite a lot of money on changes when employer attitude surveys show very worrying results. So I'm pleased that we're in a situation where the results were good last year and even better this year. As I said, it is a cause of celebration, and we'll put something in City Voice to say that, include any comments that members might want to make tonight, that we'll add that to City Voice as well, to say, to all employees, this is a good place to work, and the survey kind of reaffirms that.
Thank you, Mr. Ryan. Mr. Councillor Chamberlain, did you? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll perhaps maybe slightly unfair questions. You mentioned in your commentary that I think the revised grade structure that was implemented earlier on this year is kind of a potential. I guess you could almost see an early sign as coming through in the data that there's potential uptick. I guess the inverse of that question is, given that this will only ever be a point in time measure, are there any concerns within the council that you think would then start to appear as we look forward to next year? I guess really what I'm asking is there anything that we need to be on the lookout for as we look forward to the next 12 months?
Well, the only thing that might be a kind of a counter indicator would be, despite all of our very reassuring messages, that some employees might feel a bit unnerved by TC25, and that might mean that they think, oh, maybe I'll jump ship because something bad might be coming around the corner. We're trying to say to people that isn't the case, but so on. But I think it's difficult sometimes when there's any kind of overall change program for some employees who don't like change. So that would be the only thing I could think at the moment.
Thank you very much. Any other questions, members? Councillor Arkell, thank you.
Thank you. It's a very good report and really pleased that most members of staff are really happy working here. But I just noticed just one of the negative things that seems to be repeating here is about the communication. And just wondered what the plans are to make that better,
Look,
or what the issue is.
yeah, I mean, that the question there is, you know, do employees feel that communications about changes affecting them are affected? That's a statement, or what's that effect? And that was our lowest scoring statement last year. It's increased by 10%, so that's good. And we've discussed with Unison how how we can continue to do that. I think that there's still work to go on that one, and I think with all comms, it's the earlier the better, really. So I think it's saying to managers, if you've got the a plan coming up about how you're going to change, even if it's just a case of saying we're going to move people around the office or you change the position of the photocopy or something. If you say, well, this is what I'm minded to do, give people a chance to say what they think before you do it. That in a nutshell is how to get comms employees going, well, make sure Unison are kind of briefed as well, so they're not surprised by it. But sometimes people feel that that's happened too quickly, so they've had time to respond. Or alternatively, they feel that people have started sort of rumours circulating which aren't actually what management are planning, and that can be very difficult for management to contain sometimes. So I think it's always a work in progress. I think comms around things like that, but it is on our agenda for our next Unison meeting to discuss it.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? I have one on the turnover rate, Mr. O'Reilly. You won't be surprised. You know it's a little bugbear of mine. You mentioned a target of 12%.
I didn't say a target exactly. I said that as head of HR, I would like us to get to 12%. More of an aspiration, I think.
I can't recall our turnover rate being anywhere near 12%.
I'm an optimist, though.
And you're an optimist. I'd love to see it at 12%. I think that would be a really great achievement, actually. And as you have told committee members before, there are very good reasons why there is turnover in local authorities. Thank you. Is that an industry standard, that 12%? Where does it come from?
Yeah, it's something which most HR professionals would regard as 10% to 12% is about what you want. If it's higher than that, because you've got costs occurring from recruitment and so on. If it's lower than that, you've probably got people who are staying who should have moved on, and you're not getting fresh blood in with new ideas. So, very low turnover is bad from an HR theory point of view. Very high turnover is bad. But some industries which are sort of fast moving consumer goods, as they're called, where the training to get people up to standard is quite short. The conditions are quite tiring and the pay's not fantastic. They're happy to live at 25% turnover. That's their industry standard. You've got other industries where it takes a long time to train, and there's not a place to move around, like Thomas Weapon Authority up in Berkshire. People there, the turnover is very low because where else are you going to go? And you've probably spent years training to do what you're going to do. So there's a standard that we look for, but it is very, very industry specific.
And are there any particular areas of the council where recruitment is a major challenge?
There is, but I haven't got the information to hand at the moment because that's my workforce report, which I did last time I was here, but we'll bring that around next time.
Thank you very much. Is there any debate, members? I think we'd like to congratulate all line managers in the council on the improvement here, which is as you said, Councillor Gordon-Smith, good reading.
It is. Thank you very much. I'll make sure to put that to the City Voice article.
Yes, I'm very pleased with that. Thank you very much. Are we happy to note the report, members? Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. O'Reilly. That brings this evening's agenda to an end. The meeting is to close. Thank you for your time, and I wish you a very good evening.